How was your weekend? If you have savings in an American bank or if you work for an American bank, chances are you spend the last few days worrying about your finances. That's because another US bank has collapsed. We're talking about the First Republic Bank. It is the second largest bank failure in American history and the third bank failure since March this year. First Republic has been teetering for weeks now. 2 months back, it got a cash injection. 11 banks came together to save it. They injected $30 billion into First Republic, but the bank could not be saved. So this weekend, American regulators made some tough decisions. They took over First Republic, and now JP Morgan Chase will take over its assets. This has triggered more uncertainty. Is the US banking crisis ending, or is it getting worse? It started with the Silicon Valley Bank. We told you about it. It was the first American bank to collapse this year, the Silicon Valley Bank. Then another bank fell, the Signature Bank in New York. Days later, First Republic shot into headlines. This was in the month of March. The bank had lost some $100 billion. There were mass withdrawals, depositors began to flee, and now this bank is being bought. It's quite a dramatic story, in fact. First Republic is into private banking. It mostly serves the wealthy. The bank was started in 1985 with less than 10 employees. By July 2020, it was the 14th largest bank in the US. It had 80 offices, 80 offices in 7 American states and a staff of more than 7,200 people. It looked like a solid bank until crisis hit and it began to crumble. For perspective, look at these numbers. In January 2022, that is last year, one share of First Republic was trading at $200. In April 2023, this year, last month, one share was down to less than $5. So from $200 to less than $5. That's a fall of over 95%. And it's not like the bank did not try to avert the crisis. In the last few months, it tried to cut costs and sell assets. It decided to fire 25% of its staff, to lower the amount of outstanding loans and curb non-essential activities. Plus, it got a rescue package, the $30 billion I told you about. 11 banks gave this money in the form of deposits to First Republic, but it seems none of it was enough. And last week, the regulators took a call. They were going to take over the bank, and this weekend they pulled the trigger. After hectic activity, a buyer has been found. It will be JP Morgan. It will take over most of the assets of First Republic. This includes more than $100 billion in deposits and almost $230 billion in other assets. This includes loans and different kinds of securities. And with that, another messy bank takeover in America is now complete, which brings us to the next question. Is the banking crisis now over? Or is it just beginning? Is it getting worse from here? Honestly, it's hard to say, but here's something that we can say for sure. This crisis was avoidable. And the blame for it should go to America's central bank, the US Federal Reserve. It failed to act. And these are not my words. This is an admission from the central bank itself.
Good afternoon.
They have released a report, an assessment of the Fed's response to the crisis, and this report highlights some clear shortcomings. It says there was a lack of oversight and US officials failed to anticipate the threat. In fact, let me quote from that report. Federal Reserve supervisors failed to take forceful enough action. SVB's failure, that's Silicon Valley Bank, its failure demonstrates that there are weaknesses in regulation and supervision that must be addressed. Supervisors did not fully appreciate the extent of the vulnerabilities as Silicon Valley Bank grew in size and complexity. When supervisors did identify vulnerabilities, they did not take sufficient steps to ensure that Silicon Valley Bank fixed those problems quickly enough. So they're talking about Silicon Valley Bank, but it applies to the larger banking crisis in America.
The Federal Reserve issued its long-awaited report on the cause of the Silicon Valley Bank failure. And while it put the failure squarely in the hands of management and its board for failing to oversee a safe and sound business plan, the Fed did put some heat on itself that its own bank regulators did not respond quickly enough and forcefully enough to conditions on the ground.
So the US central bank messed up, and bankers around the world paid a price for this. You may remember these headlines. This was right after the collapse of Silicon Valley. Global banks lost $459 billion. Financial stocks took a nosedive. The crisis traveled as far as Europe. It claimed a Swiss banking giant. Credit Suisse was taken over by rival UBS, and it brought back memories of 2008. The global financial crisis of 2008, of course, it was much worse than what we're seeing right now, but it confirms our worst fears. When America sneezes, the world catches a cold. When American financial system makes a mistake, the world foots the bill for it. For our last story today, let's talk about art. It's compelling, it's enticing, it always inspires reaction, good, bad, or hungry. No, that last bit was not a faux pas. Because for some, art can even be a snack. You may remember this. A banana duct-taped to a wall. It was called art. It was worth $120,000. This was so strange, it became a viral moment in recent art history. Guess what happened then? The banana has now been eaten by an art student in South Korea. He said he was hungry, so he ate the piece of art and then he taped the peel to the wall. When questioned further, he's said to have said that he modified art. Can you blame him? Does art have to be bizarre and insanely expensive, or are we missing something here?
Imagine a fruit taped to your bedroom wall. An everyday fruit like a banana or an apple, barely fixed in place with a simple duct tape. Nothing fancy about it. Actually, that's us being polite. Frankly, it's weird and a little messed up. What if a child did that to your wall? They'd probably get scolded. What if an adult family member did it? They'd probably get shifty looks and an earful. You'd even be concerned about their mental well-being. But hey, this isn't real life. It's the mind-boggling world of art. And apparently, anything goes here. A few years ago, an artist named Maurizio Catalan did just that. He duct-taped a banana to a wall, and he titled this work Comedian. It invited some humor for sure, also memes. It went viral, and it was hailed as one of the most open-minded and inspiring works of modern art. Then, it was sold for $120,000. Now, don't you wish you were crazy enough to come up with it first? Jokes aside, why are we talking about this now? Because this banana has been gobbled up. A South Korean student took it off and ate it. He then taped its peel back on the wall. Worry not, the banana is replaced every 2 or 3 days, so no charges were pressed. Regardless, the student was unfazed. He says he was hungry. He calls it an act of rebellion. The artwork itself stands for going against logic, which makes it art, at least according to some. So the student believes that him eating it is art too, because it's rebellion against rebellion. And damaging art is art too. If you think this is confusing, we're right there with you. Why does art have to be so weird? What happened to nice portraits and correct-looking shapes? When did splashes of color on canvas or random creatures stealing gloves become art? Because just look at this. This art is by Max Klinger, and it's famous. It's supposed to show a woman losing her glove. For starters, we can't understand what the creature is, or where the glove is. Points to us for figuring out where the hands are. It doesn't make any sense, yet we can't take our eyes off it. The artist is trying to show people's obsession with simple objects, our possessions. And that's the thing about art. It can mean whatever we want it to. And what about artwork that looks like a child made it? Experts say there's usually a lot of logic that goes into each piece, a lot of emotions. But does that still explain why it's selling for such big bucks? Like this sculpture, it's by Jeff Koons. It was made in 1986. And guess how much it was sold for? Over $91 million. In what world does this make sense? Maybe we can ask the super rich? Because it's mainly thanks to them that the art industry is booming. It's worth over $65 billion. They continue to pour billions into art. For many, it's an investment. So are we missing something here? Do we lack spidey senses to understand art? Is there some inherent cleverness that makes some appreciate art more? Not really. Art is what we make of it. If art looks wacky, weird, beautiful, or scary, that's what it's supposed to mean, at least to us. There are no correct answers. Sometimes it's about putting a fruit up on the wall. Other times it's about eating that same fruit. Sometimes both are art. Other times, neither.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Starting with the US, a powerful tornado in Florida overturned cars and destroyed houses. Authorities are cleaning the debris and assessing the damage. In China, A wingsuiter successfully flew through the Tianmen cave, becoming the first Chinese man to ever do so. In Venezuela, Russian gymnasts participated at the Alba Games under their flag. And finally, what makes May the 1st significant, apart from the fact that it's May Day? We're taking you back in history. On this day, Fidel Castro banned elections and declared Cuba a socialist country. The year was 1961. Castro was addressing hundreds of thousands of Cubans at a May Day parade. He identified himself as a Marxist and Leninist. This happened right after the US government made an attempt to overthrow Castro's government, but was unsuccessful. He was unapologetically anti-American. It established close ties with the Soviet Union. During his rule, Castro created a one-party government. He wanted to control all aspects of Cuba's politics and economy. We're leaving you with this. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Holy cow.
Oh my God, it's like right in front of, oh my
email exchanges from inside the BBC, they talk about the risk of violating Indian laws. It's easier to rake up the freedom of speech debate, but does it give anyone a free pass to knowingly violate the law? America supports India because it needs India's support in return. And India is working with the US because it suits India's interests. This is how geopolitics works. Last night, he diffused a crisis with his defense minister. But today, Netanyahu was confronted with a new problem. His cabinet seems to have rebelled against him. The UK is looking at the Indian subcontinent to fill its coffers. That India seems to be negotiating from a position of power, like a partner and not a former colony. The US and Russia are dangerously close to an armed conflict. This year, 2023, New Delhi will be the capital of global diplomacy. For a country as diverse as ours, with 88% of the population illiterate, it was a very big deal to write a constitution, and that too, the world's largest. Meanwhile, if we may, here's a Republic Day gift from India for the BBC. A list of suggestions for the BBC for their upcoming documentaries. Number 1, the Kohinoor and the Colonial Loot. Number 2, an outdated monarchy and unhealthy obsession with the royals. Number 3, racism in 2023. We're waiting.